Hello learners. In the previous lecture, we discussed about the common property rights. Therein I had mentioned to you that this concept of property rights plays a very important role in what we call as Coase Theorem. And in today's lecture, we will be talking about the Coase Theorem. So, in this lecture, we will be seeing that what is Coase Theorem and also state the Coase Theorem. We will understand the policy significance of this Coase Theorem and then what are the criticisms given to Coase solution. Let us have a quick background of how this theorem came into being. We've already talked about that environmental resources are externality ridden. Why? Because they lack a clearly defined property right. Because many a times they are nobody's baby. So everybody tries to either overutilize it and not take care of it. It also leads to suboptimal production of this environmental resource. Pollution is one such externality. What happens under pollution? The polluting firm thinks that it has the right to pollute. Why? Because I am concerned with my production of my product. So whatever is happening to the environment is not solely my responsibility. Whereas the victim feels that she has the right to clean air. Somebody who is getting affected because of the pollution says that I am not concerned with what he is producing. I am not concerned that what profit he is making. But I am more concerned with the fact that the production which is taking place is creating pollution. And that pollution is negatively affecting me. So pollution hence becomes an externality. Then the question comes that who should be bearing the cost of this externality? Is it the polluter or should it be the victim? Or can these externalities be internalized? Why? Because we have just seen that in our case, that it is the firm which thinks that it has the right to pollute. Why? Because environment is for all of us. The victim feels that I have the right to clean air. So should it be the victim who pay the price for cleaning the air? Or it should be the polluter who should be charged for making this pollution. So what should be done is what we understand in Coase Theorem. As I told you in the previous lecture, property rights and Coase Theorem are very closely related. Who gave this Coase Theorem? It was Ronald Coase, a British economist, in his paper, The Problem of Social Cost, which was published in 1960, he tried to answer this question. What did he say? The Coase Theorem says that if private parties can bargain without cost over the allocation of resources, they can solve the problem of externalities on their own. That is, in the previous example which we saw, that there is an industry because of which pollution is taking place. There is a victim of this pollution. Coase says that if this victim and polluter, they can bargain with each other, that who should be taking care of this pollution without any external intervention, the problem of the externality can be solved. However, a very important criteria here is that this bargaining should be without cost. Okay, so if the private parties can bargain amongst themselves without any kind of transaction cost over the allocation of resources, that is, who will bear the cost of this pollution, they can solve the problem of externalities without any kind of government intervention. Specifically, if we want to see what Coase has said, It states that if trade is an externality, is possible and there are no transaction costs, if trade in an externality is possible and there are no transaction costs, then bargaining between these parties will lead to an efficient outcome regardless of the initial allocation of property rights. 3-4 things are important in this definition. First, we are saying if trade in an externality is possible. That is, if an externality is taking place, let us take in our case a negative externality called as pollution. If a pollution is happening because of an industry and the victim is suffering because of that externality, and if this externality, the pollution, that is this externality, the loss due to this pollution can be traded, or these parties can sit together and bargain that who is going to bear the cost of this externality, an efficient outcome will be achieved without knowing or without allocating any of the property rights. That is, without saying that who owns for this pollution. Is it the victim who's owning the resource or it is the polluter who's owning the resource? So without giving any kind of property right either to the victim or to the polluter, if this victim and polluter sit together and talk, and then within themselves they decide that who will pay whom for this externality, then a solution can be achieved without any government intervention, provided there are no transaction costs. Let us see this Coase theorem with an example which I am sure will make this concept clear to you. This is a picture which I have taken. Let us say that your neighbor has a dog and this dog barks at night. His barking affects your sleep. You do not own this dog. This dog's barking at night is creating a negative externality for you because you are unable to get a proper night's sleep. Now, there are two options in this neighbor's barking dog example. One, that you who is getting disturbed by this barking dog of your neighbor pays to the neighbor, telling him to do away with this dog, okay, or to take care that this dog does not bark and reduce your loss of sleep. Or this neighbor tells you that, okay, I pay you or I compensate you for this loss of sleep because of my dog. So in both the cases, you are trying to reduce the externality caused, in our case, the loss of sleep caused by barking of your neighbor's dog, either you paying your neighbor to get rid of this dog, or your neighbor paying you maybe to shift to another room to compensate or let this dog keep on barking. So Coase theorem says, without even giving any property rights, that is, who has the right to take care of this situation, we can come to a solution just by bargaining. Coming to a more formal Coase theorem, as I just said, it states that under certain condition, it makes no difference to efficiency. That is, the efficient allocation of resource does not get disturbed under certain condition, whether the polluter has the right to pollute or the victim has the right to clean air. Okay, so who you are giving the property right does not make a difference under certain conditions, the efficiency in the market or the optimum allocation of the pollution in the market can be brought about without giving a property right to any one person if certain conditions are proved. So whether it is the polluter to whom you have given the right to pollute, or it is the victim who has the right to clean air, it will no make difference if there are certain conditions. Coase in his example had given the case of a baker and a doctor. A baker has a bakery very close to a doctor's clinic. By virtue of the type of work this baker is doing, it makes a lot of noise. And this noise disturbs the doctors in giving consultation to his patients. Now the question is, should the doctor have the right to stop this baker from doing business, or the baker has the right to make the noise with, irrespective of what is happening to the doctor? So what Coase had said, that baker and doctor can eventually bargain with each other and see that who compensates whom, and it will make no difference whether you give baker the right to make noise while production, or you give the right to doctor to have a silent surrounding. And we will see how this happens. So going further with the same what we have said, that makes no difference whether the polluter has the right to pollute or the victim has the right to clean air, as right to pollute and right to clean air are both property rights that have value. As a polluter, you have the right to pollute because you say that I belong to this area, the air is as much as yours as is mine, so I have the right to pollute. So right to clean air, as a victim you say I have a right to clean air. So as a right to pollute and a right to clean air, both are property rights, both have their values. If the trade is allowed between the polluter and the victim, efficiency would prevail. Who will have a right would depend on values that right more. That is, the person who values the right more will have a right actually. If it is the polluter who values his right more, we will give the property right to him. If it is the victim who claims to have a right to clean air more than the polluter, he will be given that right. Now let us explain this with the help of an example of a paper mill and a fish hatchery. Let us say a river is flowing and that river is a common good. Okay, so both the firms, the paper mill and the fish hatchery, both are situated near this river. Now the problem has arisen because the economic activities involve the joint use of this river. Then the paper mill produces, it is going to emit the chemicals into this river. That pollution can damage or you can kill the fish or have an impact on the quality of fish. So it will have an impact on the business of the fish hatchery. Now the fish hatchery believes that as per it is their legal rights, so the river activities then can be used by him. So if fish hatchery is saying that as per the legal rights, the river can be used for only fishing, then the paper mill will not be permitted to discharge the effluent into its river. But if the paper mill feels that it is their right to discharge the effluent, then the fish hatchery will have to make arrangements to take care that the river or the paper mill emits as less effluent as possible. So, three situations can arise because there is a conflict now. The river is being used by both. One is saying that it is my right to pollute. One is saying it is my right to have clean river. Three situations can happen. One, we will see a determination or efficient level of pollution. Then we'll see that what happens if the fishery has the right to clean environment in this case, if he claims to be the victim. And situation three, if the paper mill says it has the right to pollute. Three situations we will understand graphically, and we will see in all the three cases, as per Coase, if the bargaining is possible without any transaction cost, we will come to the same point. Let us see this. We are saying, we have taken an example of a fish hatchery and we have taken an example of paper mill. On x-axis, we are measuring the emissions which are being done. Okay. Blue line is the marginal abatement cost. That is, if the polluter has to reduce the emissions. So, what is the cost he is going to incur? And marginal damage is coming to the victim, because as and as more emissions are there, the damage is increasing. In our case, if the paper mill emits more and more into the river, the damage to the fish hatchery will be greater. So, more the emissions, more will be the marginal damage to the victim. And more the emissions, less will be the cost to the polluter. So, if he emits less, that's a greater cost to him. And if he emits more, because he does not have to clean the pollution which he is doing, so his cost will be less. Effectively speaking, leaving it to the market mechanism, where the marginal damage is equal to the marginal cost, this red dot which you are saying will show that 4 tons of emission per week is what is efficient. We have seen, we have just said that we will be taking 3 situations. One, what is efficiently is there, that where the marginal damage is equal to the marginal abatement cost, this red dot. So, 4 emissions per week, and if it is costing 100, then it is 4 into 100 will be the cost. Okay. Now, what we are saying is that what happens now if this polluter says that I have the complete right to damage, to emit whatsoever I want to. Okay. What is going to happen? The polluter will try to see that its cost should be the least, because I have the right to pollute. If I have the right to pollute, what I will say, that let me have the least cost. Least cost means let me have the maximum emissions. So, maximum emissions are 8 tons emissions per week. Okay. Now, if this fish hatchery, which is the victim, greater the emissions, more the damage to it. If they are as per Coase, if this victim goes to the polluter and says, okay, you may be having the right to pollution, but this 8 tons of emissions per week are creating a lot of problem for me. So, why don't you reduce these emissions? And for every reduction in your emission, I will pay you something. I will pay you some price. So, whatever it costs to reduce the emissions, I will take care of that cost. So, this victim, because he says the polluter has the right, he will go to him and ask him to reduce his emissions. Okay. So, where will he go? He will try to see that this polluter reduces his emissions as much as possible. For him, for the fish hatchery, the best position is that the emissions should be 0. But we will see that he will also stop at 4 tons per week. Why? Because if his emissions are at 8, the marginal damage is way more than the cost he is paying. So, he would like to pay the cost. So, till between 4 emissions to 8 emissions, the marginal damage to the fish hatchery is more than the cost which this victim will pay to the polluter to reduce this emission, because this curve is above the marginal damage curve. The marginal damage curve is above the marginal abatement cost curve. So, the victim or the fish hatchery in this case will say, okay, you reduce your emissions from 8 to 6, and because my cost will be this much, but my damage was 150, but if I let you reduce from 8 to 6, I only have to pay you 50. So, I will ask him to reduce his emissions, because the damage he was doing was more to me than the money which I have to give him to reduce his emissions. So, definitely I would like to see that he reduces his emissions. Once he comes down to 4, what happens is that the marginal damage cost becomes equal to the marginal abatement cost. After this, the cost of reducing emissions is more to the victim than the damage which is being done. So, the victim in this case will also stop at 4. Okay. So without assigning any property rights, just by bargaining, you are coming to the same point where you were in first situation. The third situation is, let us say, now this victim owns, this fishery hatcheries owns the right. It says, okay, nobody has the right to pollute. But this paper firm, in order to produce something, will have to emit some kind of effluents into the river. If it does not do, it will be a zero production frame. Either it will cease to exist, but if it doesn't want to cease to exist, it will have to kind of do something here. Correct? So when he does, what this polluter is going to do is, this polluter will go to the victim and say, okay, let me at least, emit something into the system. And whenever I am emitting, I will pay you certain damages. Okay, so if his cost is less than the damages he has to pay, fishery will allow him to emit into the system, and eventually they will also stop at 0.4. So irrespective whether it is the victim who has the right or it is the polluter who has the right, both of them will come down to this point E, which was the efficient point. So this is what Coase said, that even if we do not give any property rights, but if there are no transaction cost, if less number of parties are involved, then eventually all of them will settle back to the same point, which is 4 tons per emissions. So this becomes your efficient level of waste. Now, Coase theorem basically assuming that some producers or consumers are subject to externalities generated by other producers or consumers. So these are some of the assumptions on which this Coase theorem is based. Something like everybody has a perfect information. It's a perfect market, so consumers and producers are price takers. There is a costless court system, then only the transactions cost will be zero. Na? Otherwise, if there is a cost involved, then if there is a certain legal system, you have to pay to the court, you have to pay court fees, you have to engage lawyers, then their transaction cost will be present, and then the system will not work. Both producers and consumers are rational, so they are maximizing their profits. There is no income and wealth effect, means that, see, what happens is that as individuals, as human beings, when we own a property, it's a wealth which we have. Okay, so when the wealth is there, then what happens is that you talk about owning that property, right, because it gives you a wealth effect. But we are saying that there is no wealth effect and there is no transaction cost. So, stating the Coase theorem, we say, in this case, when there is no transaction cost, the initial assignment of property rights regarding the externality does not matter for efficiency. As we have just seen, whether the rights are with the polluter or with the victim, both of them are coming at the same equilibrium point. However, if any of these conditions do not hold, the initial agreement of right does matter. For example, if there are transaction costs, then it does matter that who has the property right. Is it the polluter who has the property right, or is it the victim who has the property right? But in case there is no transaction cost and these parties are able to bargain, it doesn't matter whether the right is with the polluter or the victim, because in any case, they are going to come down to the same situation of efficiency. Now, as we've just said, what are the conditions? The above analysis is based on the fact that the bargaining costs are low, and also the resource owners must be able to identify the damages to their property and legally prevent them. That is, you should have perfect information. You should have enough knowledge that you are able to quantify the damages which are being done to you, or what is the abatement cost of reducing this pollution, or what is the damage caused by this pollution. You should be able to monetize that. You should be able to give a monetary value for that. However, what are the problems? The problems are that in best of the cases, if we are saying very few parties are very few parties should be involved, and the source of externalities should be very well defined. But what happens is, in practice, many parties are involved. For example, pollution. Now, you cannot pin down it on one industry that because of this pollution is occurring. There may be many companies in that area because of that air pollution is occurring. And everybody may be contributing a different level of effluents or the emissions into the air. Also, the victims are many, and the pollution is affecting every victim differently. So, when many people are involved, often what happens is that externality is also very poorly defined. For example, how will you quantify noise pollution? How will you actually quantify air pollution? How much air pollution is because of vehicular pollution, vehicles, and how much pollution is actually because of the industry? So that becomes very difficult to define. So, costless bargaining is hence very difficult to achieve practically in many circumstances, even though theoretically it appears to be very easy to define. Similarly, as we have said, that Coase theorem works when the transaction costs are absent. But are they really absent? For example, if there are many victims but a single polluter, then having many victims agree to pay to the polluter to reduce pollution would be difficult. For example, if we are saying the right to pollution lies with the polluter, and the victim should pay to the polluter for not emitting. Now, if there are many victims, we don't know how many of them will be actually be willing to pay, because they also know that this is something which is, there's a free rider. If rest of them pay, I don't pay, still the pollution will be controlled. So, the effective bargaining will not be taking place. And bargaining not only talks about monetary cost, but also psychic cost. We have just said that you should be able to monetarily put value on the costs which are associated with pollution. But bargaining in itself also involves certain mental and psychic cost. So that we are not accounting for in Coase theorem. Hence, the second part of the Coase theorem comes into picture. The first part we have seen that if their transaction costs are not there, it doesn't matter that who actually owns the property rights, because if they bargain with each other, it boils down to the same situation. So whether the right of pollution is with the polluter or right of clean air is with the victim, if they are able to bargain, they will reach the market-determined efficient solution. But the second part of the Coase theorem says that if this bargaining becomes costly, that is, many parties are involved, information is imperfect, that is, it is not only the monetary cost, it is the psychic cost. You are not able to decompose how much air pollution is because of industry, how much air pollution is because of vehicles. Then comes the role of law. Then liability rules helps to achieve optimality. That is when we said that economics and law are integrated in Coase theorem. So it says that if bargaining is costly and information is imperfect, then liability rules will help to achieve optimality, and the party has the least costly way of dealing with the harmful effects of externality should be made responsible for paying the cost associated with externality. That is, between these two parties, the party which has the least costly way of dealing with the harmful effects, is it the polluter who is having the least costly way of dealing, or is it the victim who has a lesser cost of taking care of these harmful effects, should be responsible for paying the cost associated with externality? So basically, as I told you, this is giving a natural link between economics and laws. So when transaction costs are present, it does matter where the rights are vested. And these rights have to be vested through legal system. For example, in our country, we see that if industry is into a type of a production process which is leading to pollution, the government automatically asks that polluter to have pollution control equipments. Okay, because there we are saying that the victim has the right to have clean air, the victim has the right to have clean water. So the polluter needs to pay the cost for pollution. Okay, so legal system has to be designed which will give this right. What is the significance? The significance of the theorem is it gives a very important role to the transaction cost. As you've seen that more the transaction cost, less effective the bargaining will be. So the role of the government comes into picture, that how we can reduce these transaction costs so that without actual intervention of the governments, we can have effective solution to the pollution. Also, it talks about allocation efficiency, that is how much should be produced. As we see that in that graph, that emissions were till 8 tons per week, but we settled at 4 tons. Why? Because that was the most efficient way. That is, you are allowing both of them to operate. There is a mutually accepted market determined level of pollutions which is accepted by both the victim and the polluter. So how much should be produced, how much should be emitted, is decided through Coase theorem, which leads to allocation efficiency. Also, it talks about need of policy measures by the government when the transaction costs are more or when many parties are involved in the system. So how the policy should be designed that we have effective property rights so that the victim or the polluter, both of them know that who is going to bear the cost of this pollution. Of course, a very important critique is of the Piggywind taxes, which we will be doing in the subsequent lecture. Taxes is another way of reducing this externality. That is, the person who is polluting, a tax is levied on it. But because of that taxation, we see a loss of consumer surplus as well as a loss of producer surplus. And there is an unnecessarily government intervention or a policy measure which has come into picture. Coase theorem says that there is no need to government to intervene if we are having a good transaction and a bargaining system. So it criticizes the role. It says that we don't need any taxes because it will unnecessarily increase the price. Rather, let the polluter and the victim decide that who is going to bear the cost and how much both of them are willing to bear. There are a few criticisms, that is, its assumption of perfect competition and rationality. We all know that actually there is no perfect competition and rationality. It doesn't talk about the distributional impact. For example, if we rest the right with the polluter, maybe there are certain victims who are getting adversely affected by this pollution. We have not talked about them. Then collective action problems are not resolved when there are many victims, when the society at large is getting negatively affected because of this pollution. Coase theorem fails to explain that. And then, of course, there are legal and institutional constraints. Everywhere the administration and the government is not always willing to get into a system like this. So let us just do a quick revision of Coase theorem. We have said it is a solution which lets market set the price for pollution and hence solves the problem. It says that the problem of pollution can be set through bargaining between the polluter and the victim without actually worrying about the initial assignments of the legal rights. And then it says that the outcome, however, actually depends on the initial property rights in case of transaction cost. That is, the person who is willing to pay more should be given, or the person who is damaging more should be given more transaction rights. So that is what is Coase theorem. I hope you have enjoyed it, and thank you so much.